Welcome to Paul's Perspective. In this clip, we have Jared Bernstein, a member of Biden's administration. He's one of his economic advisors, going on a Fox News show, which we all know that Fox is a very dishonest, disingenuous, manipulative group of individuals putting on not the news, but some type of propaganda effort. But anyway, this is not really about Fox at all. I mean, I think we should all know that Fox is a bad place to get information or to get an honest perspective. And it's also not about the person who is uploading this video. His name is Luke Beasley. I think he's great. He does kind of what we would call I wouldn't call it investigative reporting. I would say that he goes out of his way to get the alternative perspective. So he's more of a, I guess, a contrarian journalist, in the sense that he's constantly, because he's left leaning, but he's constantly evaluating and examining, the other side of the aisle, so to speak, right? But what I want to focus on is the underlying, I guess, premises of the argument, right? So many times, and he actually makes Luke makes a great point of showing that it's not the economy itself that drives, perspectives and opinions, but the perception of the economy. And that's kind of what I want to focus on is I think the lack of savvy and true understanding of the things that we argue about every day and the things that we say that we want to accomplish. So in this video, he talks about the economy, right? So he says, the economy and the performance of the economy. So that's number one. First and foremost, what do people genuinely think of when they think of the economy? And one of the things that the gentleman, Mr. Bernstein, brought up is that spending, right? Consumer spending is up.
So we're just coming out of a Black Friday that is already setting records for online buying, between 10 and 16 billion for Black Friday online. We are looking at consumer spending that's been driving this economy forward, posting growth rates that are north of 5%.
So I don't know how many conversations that we really see of the average Joe, and that's another perspective I want to bring up, right? So, who you speak to has a huge impact on the perspective that you get. People who are making, $40,000 to $80,000 a year are going to have a completely different perspective to people who are making $150,000, $160,000 and are in a relationship with somebody else who their partner is making good money, and their home, they're managing finances a certain way. I mean, it's a totally different world, whether you have good intentions or not of managing your finances well, of a person who has one or two children, or a group, or, a couple who has one or two children, and they, I guess collectively make $100,000, and then, a couple who has one or two children and they collectively make, I don't know, $300,000, right? So those are two different worlds we're talking about. And so when Mr. Bernstein made the comments about consumer spending, which is, again, for me, problematic, because they're using that as a metric of the positive or health of the economy, when I think objectively we can look at that as one of the problems, right? I'm not sure how many people know this, but if you compare the marginal propensity to consume versus the marginal propensity to save between America and other countries, I know Japan is really high, Scandinavian countries are really high, some Central European countries are really high on that. Saving is a much better metric for the health of an economy, if we're talking about how that health of the economy translates to the health of its constituents, right? The consumers, the citizens of a country. Because if we're just looking at an economy as in GDP, how many things are being produced and sold, because being sold, it could be sold on foreign markets to, and it could be any product. But if we're talking about leisurely items, non-essentials, that really just tells us how companies are doing, right? And traditionally, companies are going to take their profits and they're going to, either put it back into the business to build more machines, more technology, which many times will take away jobs, or they take that money and they pay dividends, or they reward executives, which again does not quote unquote trickle down to regular citizens, the person who's making $50,000, $60,000 a year. Like, what type of bonuses are they going to get, right? That's very much variable, where they get paid extra last, and either the company gets paid first, or the company is invested in, a little bit more heavily, instead of the actual workers. So that's one of the things that really kind of stood out to me, is that when we use these terms, I think it's really important to be able to understand what those terms mean and what the true implications of the target that we're talking about, right? Because when Luke, who is very much a man of the people, I genuinely believe that he cares about, individuals regardless of their, ethnicity and their socioeconomic, standing. Like, he's genuinely a egalitarian type individual who's trying to understand and promote positive politics, economics, social programs, right? But if we look at and we say something that, oh, the economy is doing great under Biden, or the economy is doing horrible under Bush or Trump or whatever, we really have to understand what those terms mean and what is being evaluated as great or as positive, and what the comparisons are, right? Comparisons is another point of this.
If you're going to, as we should, take into consideration the way that the pandemic impacted Trump's awful economic record, then we must take into consideration how it may have impacted Biden's economic record, which, even with those facts, we see a strong economy right now. So what does that say about Biden's handling of the economy?
Are you comparing it to when you come out of the pandemic, when, things shut down for a reason and on purpose? So that's kind of like a false, increase, when it's really just rebounding from a purposeful stagnation, for lack of a better word. Things were literally legally closed down, and then the response to that is going to be, obviously, that people are going to want services when those businesses and those industries are open back up full force, right? So understanding that, I think, is important, because then we can really evaluate whether or not the terms being used and the sentiments being expressed truly impact the people that we're talking about, or if it's just, again, a dog and pony show, which I believe it is in this case, specifically when it comes to the economy, because I think the economy is usually talked about on a macro level of how a company's doing, how is GDP doing, how is the revenue of corporations doing, totally ignoring that many times that the surplus revenue and the increased profitability of certain corporations is not going to directly or automatically, mechanically impact the citizens of that entity. And so I think that's one important part. Another part I wanted to look at is when they talked about unemployment. Again, unemployment needs to be segregated, right? So, we need to look at what types of jobs are growing, right? Because if you add 40,000 jobs, and those 40,000 jobs are $15 an hour jobs, yeah, that's great for somebody who was not working at all, right? If you're not working at all and now you're making $30,000 a year, that drastically changes your situation in a positive way. Does it make you, safe? No, not in this country, but it's drastically positive. But if the 40,000 jobs or the 50,000 jobs that were added are $15 an hour jobs, but they're being taken by people who used to make, $40 or $50 an hour, and that's just the best that they can do, that's problematic, right? Like, that's not a positive thing. So I think it's really important for us to be able to, and it's not easy, right? It's not easy to just take this information and go find it in these different places, but damn sure, the place to get it is not at CNN, right? It's not at MSNBC or Fox. It's at a government site that shows, whatever information we're looking for from a very official standpoint where they can be held legally liable, where CNN doesn't have to be. I mean, they can probably say that we got this information from, labor.org or something like that. But at the end of the day, you got to have a good idea of where to get really healthy sources of information, and then being able to decipher what that information really means. In this, example of great, we have, drastic numbers of jobs that were created or that were reestablished during a certain period of time, but at what economic level, and were they filled by people who previously were making, and I don't even know if that's a statistic. If they, figure out that, okay, so you got a job, where did you come from? I don't know if that's an actual statistic, but that's something that I would want to know. Huge difference. Huge difference. The last part I want to touch on is the credit or the responsibility bestowed upon a president. Many times it goes both ways, whether they, get the blame or get the quote unquote reward or the accomplishment of saying, oh, under Biden, these many jobs were created. Okay, well, why? Right? If you don't ask why, then you're not really understanding whether or not Joe Biden had something to do with those jobs, because possibly there's absolutely nothing he had to do with it. And sometimes it's because sometimes it's above and beyond. Biden could have been doing something that literally went against the creation of those jobs, but a company, did something or whatever. So it's really really important to understand what the president can control from a standpoint of, for example, right? So in this piece, they spoke about wages and prices.
And wages have not kept up.
So real wages have grown. Real wages, in other words, wages are beating prices now. So is disposable income, by the way.
But for most of that time, they have not.
Correct. So I'm talking about the last 4 or 5 months.
Like, do you understand how wages and prices are impacted? Like, what can the president do? What measures, what levers can the president pull or push to impact wages or prices? Because wages and prices are decided by companies. Point blank period. We live in a capitalistic society. We don't live in a place where the government determines the price of the vast majority of goods. Obviously, they're utilities. They're things that, we're trying to assess as essential to humanity in a healthy society. So healthcare, electricity, water, things like that. But outside of that, how does the president impact wages or prices? And if you don't understand that, then why are we giving him credit, right? Why are we giving Biden credit? And that's something that frustrates me. I don't know if Republicans and Democratic, both representatives and proponents in the media, know for sure that the president has almost no true control over wages or prices, and they're still trying to give credit for Biden, or if they're just pandering to the stupidity. Are they stupid, or are they pandering to the stupidity or the naivety of the general public? That is a question that I'd love to kind of get answered. That's a question that I think we should evaluate when we understand, again, the terms that are being used, the implications that are being insinuated, and then that idea that we should then follow a particular party because things happened under their watch. I think it's a lot more important to truly understand what those metrics are, how they're measured, and whether or not they're really good indicators of what's trying to be conveyed, and then being able to truly give the credit or the blame to the right individual within that framework.